Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's last post ceremony. My name is Greg Kimball, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Air Force is Warrant Officer Gavin Jones. We warmly welcome the family of Sister Mary Elizabeth Cuthbertson, whose story will soon be told. We are also honoured to acknowledge the representatives of Australian College of Nursing, the Australian Nursing Federation, and nursing officers of the Australian Defence Force. We also welcome members of the Redlands Branch National Servicemen's Association of Queensland who are joining us today. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL and Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria, RSL Queensland, who are joining the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the pool of reflection by family, visitors and students on behalf of Geelong Grammar Middle School, Corio, Victoria. Please stand in singing the national anthem. Students, please be seated. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight we'll read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and operations for more than a century. But first, we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths and floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the pool of reflection.
Today we remember and pay tribute to Sister Mary Cuthbertson, who was killed during the Second World War. Popularly known as Beth, Mary Cuthbertson was born on the 5th of March 1910 in Stirling, South Australia, to William and Lillian Cuthbertson. She had two younger brothers, James and Gordon, and a younger sister, Joan. Cuthbertson later lived in Ballarat, where her father was sub-manager of the Myer Woolen Mills. She attended Ballarat High School and trained as a nurse at Ballarat Base Hospital and went on to study at the Queen Victoria Hospital in Melbourne. In August 1937, her engagement to Dr. John Scholes was announced, but he died suddenly the following March. A memorial notice Cuthbertson placed in the Adelaide and Victorian newspapers ended with the words, "Someday we'll understand." Cuthbertson was living in Ballarat when she enlisted in the Australian Imperial Force on the 20th of August 1940. Taken on strength with the 7th Australian General Hospital under the Australian Army Nursing Service, she served in various camps before embarking for Singapore in July 1941. There, Cuthbertson was attached to the 10th Australian General Hospital and was in Malaya when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. Once the fall of Singapore became inevitable, most Australian personnel were evacuated from the island. Cuthbertson was one of 65 Australian nurses who left Singapore aboard the Vina Brook on the 14th of February. 2 days later, the ship was bombed by the Japanese and many lives were lost. Cuthbertson was among those responsible for ensuring passengers were evacuated. Some were put into lifeboats, and those who could swim made for the nearby Bunker Island. Some of the survivors travelled to the nearest port to formally surrender to the Japanese, but Cuthbertson was among the 22 Australian nurses who remained on the beach to tend the wounded. On the morning of the 16th of February, a group of Japanese soldiers arrived at the beach. The men were ordered around a headland where they were killed. The nurses were ordered to walk into the sea. When the water reached their waists, the Japanese opened fire with their machine guns and all but one were killed. Beth Cuthbertson was 31 years old. In 2004, Ballarat opened its Australian Ex-Prisoners of War Memorial, where Cuthbertson's name is listed among the more than 36,000 former prisoners of war. Her sister, Joan, was at the opening and recalled the pain of not knowing what had happened. It was a terrible thing for my parents to wait for the news. We only knew that Beth was missing. It really was a terrible time for our family. In the early 1990s, Joan returned to the beach where her sister was killed, taking her daughter, Beth, who she named in her sister's honour. Sister Mary Elizabeth Cuthbertson is commemorated on the Singapore Memorial, and her name is listed on the Roll of Honour on my left, along with some 40,000 others from the Second World War. Her photograph is displayed beside the pool of reflection. This is but one of the many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Sister Mary Elizabeth Cuthbertson, who gave her life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the reading of the ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them. lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozières, on the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they'll be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the last post ceremony. We thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial and wish you all a very good evening.